Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
About the issue of adoption. Have you ever considered adopting a child? Oftentimes that word strikes fear in the hearts of some individuals, and yet we have talked about the importance of adoption, especially as an alternative to abortion. And so we want to spend some time today telling you a story, giving you a little better understanding of what the process might entail, and encouraging you to consider what you might do to join in this wonderful opportunity to give a life to others who might have not had the kind of life that you can provide. So let me encourage you. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to maybe share your conversation with us. Perhaps you have a comment, a question, or a story, and we'd love to hear that. We have in studio with us today Gale Duran. She is the author of the book 1 Million Babies, An Adoption Story. I might mention that we have information about her book on the website. We have a video of her that you can watch, as well as under the articles section, we have kind of a summary of the book, and then a web link to GaleDuran.com. So you have some great ways to connect up with her. And Gale, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for the invitation, Kerby. I'm glad to be here.
We were with you at the Christian Writers Conference, and again, that conference was really very good, by the way, I might just say, but that's another story. But certainly you had told me about your story about adoption, and I think we are going to be able to encourage a number of people to consider what they might do to join in the millions of individuals over the years that have adopted children.
That's exactly right. Adoption is a good option, and I'm really excited to share my story today.
You know, let me jump to the back of your book real quickly, because this helps give some context. You have a whole section here on adoption. Currently, more than 400,000 children in the foster care system in the United States today. Over 100,000 of those children are eligible for adoption. They're looking for these forever families. We tend to forget about this sometimes, but it is something that when we talk about abortion, we'll say, but adoption's an option for you to consider. But you have really helped us understand, especially as I've gone through your book, this is sort of a crisis issue, and we really need to challenge more of our listeners to step up and consider what they might do to adopt a child.
It's certainly an epidemic. It's an epidemic of proportions. I can speak about Texas, and now that we have all the children coming across the border, it's intensified. However, I think if you just look at our local DFW area and the listeners that are listening today, you'll know that so many of the parents come from a broken family. Mm-hmm. And so, as the Bible tells us, generation after generation, many of those fathers don't know how to father. Starting back with World War I, World War II, so many of the fathers were taken out of the family. And so as the family goes, so goes the nation. And so today's families are broken. And so many times the father doesn't know how to step up to be that Christian leader in that home, Kerby. And so with meth and drugs and alcohol and pornography and all those problems, we need some strong Christian families, and we also need some fathers to be mentored by some strong men to give them some leadership knowledge.
Certainly want to encourage you to consider what you might do in your own community. And Gale, I guess, first of all, we need to tell the story of Shauna, because that helps us get to Jeb. But tell the story, because this is a wonderful adoption story. It's a very significant part of your book, and I think it illustrates, again, exactly why we're doing this program today.
Well, thank you. And Shauna is a true part of our family adoption. We know some parts, Kerby, about the biological mother. She was a prostitute in the Fort Worth area. She was not able to take care of herself, and due to the human trafficking problems we have right now, she was caught in the prostitute trap.
Wow.
She did fall in love with this man and thought it was going to be a forever. And when he found out that the child that she bore was not his child, then he kicked her to the curb. So Shauna decided to take the baby to the hospital and drop him off, and that's where our part comes in, because my family became a foster home, and when the phone rang, my daughter said, Mom, quick, they're bringing a 2-day-old baby to the house. And so the family scrambled together, and that's when this little boy named Jeb came into our lives.
Yes. Just on the husband, at first he was seemingly very excited about that until he found out the other part of that. So, don't want to make him out to be a bad guy initially. I mean, he thought it was his, and she was somewhat had fear and trepidation about how he'd react. And so it wasn't until he realized it wasn't his that some of those unfolded, right?
That's correct. He was deliberate, and he was caring in the beginning, but DNA swabs nowadays, and that's when she found out the baby really wasn't his.
And before we talk about your involvement, you mentioned just in passing a few issues we've talked about on this program. Even this time last week, we were talking about sexual trafficking. We've talked about pornography. We've talked about prostitution. We've talked about the issue of drugs. We've talked about all these issues. When you talk about adoption, it doesn't just stay in this category. It kind of relates to all the other social ills that we've talked about here on Point of View, doesn't it?
That's correct. And your listeners are aware and informed of all of those potential problems. And adoption can come in so many different forms. You can have siblings, you can have international, you can have local, you can go through agencies, you can go through your local child protective service. There's so many opportunities for people to get involved in adoption.
Wow. Well, we have Jeb, of course, you actually gave him the name, but 2 days old, comes to the house. Talk about some of that, because, again, I want also some of our listeners to consider what they might do in foster care, as you mentioned already, and I quoted from your book, 400,000 children in the foster care system right now. So this is just one of many.
And being a former foster home developer, one has a hard time grasping the number of cases right now that a social worker will have to take care of.
Wow.
I mean, just, so many that he or she has a hard time getting to visit the children. My time with the foster home is that when you call, you get an opportunity to have your home what we call licensed, and your family will go through a series of 6 different week-based training. And so our daughter called the Arrow Project, and they were involved, and when that phone call came, their family was already a registered foster home in the Fort Worth area. And when the phone call came, I talked to our other grandchildren, and they said, Grandma, that was one of the happiest days of our life, because this little boy came into the home and came with formula and diapers and things like that. And it was just a really fearful, exciting, terrified, and also wonderful moment when that little baby came into the house.
You mentioned something in passing, which, again, I want to emphasize for just a minute, and that is the caseload today for some of these workers is just off the charts, because we haven't funded the system as well as it should. Because abortions have gone up, they assume that adoptions have gone down. And so there's an assumption that these individuals really have to cover more families than really humanly they can cover. True?
That's right. Plus, in Shauna's case, Shauna made an adoption plan and took the baby to the hospital. But Kerby, I would say probably 85% of the children in the adoption situation now are taken from parents that are addicted to drugs, abuse, neglect, etc. Our daughter works at Children's Hospital in Dallas, and she said, Mom, you would not believe how many children come in with broken arms and things like that, and the fathers, are then choosed with abuse, and then the children are put into the foster care situation. So
we'll continue our conversation as we talk about adoption right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Jesse Jackson is at it again. This time his target is Silicon Valley. He has called upon the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate why these high-tech companies don't have more racial diversity. He argues there's no talent shortage, there's an opportunity shortage. The latest figures show that nearly 90% of the people who work at Twitter, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and LinkedIn are white or Asian. Changing the racial diversity of Silicon Valley is what Jesse Jackson says is the next step in the civil rights movement. Let me begin by stating something missing in his analysis. Asians are minorities. Somehow, whenever we talk about racial diversity, people of Asian descent aren't counted as a minority. Men and women of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Indian descent bring lots of racial diversity to the workforce. Now let's look at graduation rates. Jason Riley, writing in the Wall Street Journal, discovered that 71% of science and engineering students are white, 14% Asian, while only 7% are black and 7% are Hispanic. If you add the white and Asian graduates percentages together, you get 85%. That is approximately what you find in Silicon Valley. If you focus just on engineering degrees, you find the percentages are even lower. In 2012, blacks earned only 4% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in the discipline. Jason Riley observes Silicon Valley's workforce does not reflect racial animus towards blacks. Rather, it reflects the rates at which whites and Asians are earning the requisite degrees from America's most selective institutions. Forcing Google and Yahoo to lower hiring standards in order to satisfy Mr. Jackson's definition of diversity would only slow innovation and make these companies less competitive. The best way to change the racial mix in these high-tech companies would be to improve the public schools where black and Hispanic students study and to encourage many of them to pursue a degree in engineering. That would be more effective than the Jesse Jackson Silicon Valley shakedown. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we're talking about the subject of adoption, and if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have a comment or a question, maybe a story. We'd love to hear from you. The book is entitled 1 Million Babies, an Adoption Story. Gale Duran is with us today. I might mention that the book not only tells the story, which we're telling right now, but in the back there is an adoption and foster care guide, a very complete one, almost 20 pages of great material and information. If you've been thinking about adoption, or maybe this program will challenge you to consider adoption, maybe you're thinking about foster care, we wanted to get some of these resources to you, and you can find out more by going to the website. We also have Gale's website there as well, and also information about her book, an article about the book, and a video that your kids put together. So just some great stories here. And I guess I'll pick up one more because you were talking about grandchildren. Gale, there's probably an assumption out there that the people that are probably going to adopt a child are going to be 20-something, 30-something. People can watch the live cast here and see that you're probably a little bit older than that. And I think there's an illustration here that you're never too old to do good things to other people in the human race, right?
That's right. And I would be having 5, 6, 7, 8 children of my own, but my deceased husband said, no, when I give you 3, you'll want 4 and 5. So I've always had a passion for children, working in the foster care and also in the 4-H program, Sunday school, etc. But I think that if I could adopt, I would. Of course, my husband and I could become a foster home with the old age, but children like to have younger parents. And at the same time, loving one another is at the top of the charts Kerby, and I think that love comes in many different forms. It could be that you're not interested in adoption, but perhaps you would make a wonderful foster home, and that is just to take that unwanted child out of a harmful situation and foster them, say, for 12 to 18 months. And that's basically what we need right now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Again, if people just join the program, they'll find out as they look at your book, 400,000 nationwide. And since we're broadcasting in, 43 different states, people can kind of divide that up and figure out what those needs are. And I think you can't find a place in the country where there aren't needs right now for foster families. So that's something else to consider. And calls coming in already, 1-800-351-1212. But before we take some of those phone calls, there seem to be a lot of myths about foster care and adoption. I don't know if we want to go through all of them, but for people out there right now that are saying, I'm not so sure I want to bring in a child. Of course, with the issue of immigration right now, do I want to adopt a child from El Salvador, Guatemala, or just even adopt a child from the other side of the town? There's some hesitancy, and some of that are due to myths that aren't true. Can you kind of dispel a few of those?
That's right. And back in the 80s, when we were an active foster home, many of the people in the local neighborhood said, well, your kids will learn bad language, your kids will get lice, it's terrible if you bring those children into your home. And what the truth really is, Kerby, is that those children ask our family of origin to be selfless, to be other-centered, to be patient, to be kind, and to always put their needs first. And that's something very unusual for that foster child, because usually they've been neglected, abused, and abandoned. So they need to know that families out there, there's different families. It's not always neglect. And so I think that the families, foster families, always learn something from that child, and that is to be selfless and have a pilgrim's heart.
And in some of these cases, we can use Jeb as an example, but others as well, there's oftentimes a disability. In Jeb's case, a hearing, but could be that the child is Downs. It could be that they have a learning disability, dyslexia, whatever. And that, of course, requires a loving parent, but it also illustrates how we can maybe learn a little bit more about being selfless and giving. And right now in this kind of me-oriented culture where children are kind of the center of parental attention, I think sometimes a little of that's very good to get them no longer focused on themselves, but reaching out to the others that have been brought into the home.
I can speak to the children that came into our home back in the 80s that today our daughters still talk about our foster daughters and what they learned. And I would have never recognized, Kerby, that God was already weaving his tapestry through the lives of our family. And 20 years later, maybe 30 years later, we have a child that's adopted. And now I see that he has completely changed our 3 biological grandchildren and taken their perspective. And the little boy will cry because he has no speech. And the little sister will say, "What's the matter, buddy? What do you want, sister, to get you a drink?" And so the attention is not self-centered. And of course, when other people were in public, they'll say, "What is he, stupid?" And then the children will stand up for the little boy and recognize that he needs to be sheltered and not bullied. And that's another whole area.
Oh, it certainly is. It's amazing how much this issue of adoption connects to so many other topics we address here on Point of View. Let's take a phone call, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Arizona first, KNLB. Michelle, you're on with Gale Duran.
Hi. I'm 55, and we adopted my brother because my mom wasn't supposed to have any after me in 1966. We got him when he was 4 months old, and from the time he was in our family, a lady friend came over to our house one day and said something, and my mom replied, I just had him, and he's beautiful. And she goes, "You didn't have him, you adopted him." But in our eyes, we had him. And now he's 48 years old, and he's taking care of me because of my job situation. And I don't know where our family would be today had his mother, she was thinking about abortion. She was Catholic, and the father wanted him, and they wanted to get married, but she decided no. And we knew more about the family situation than normally most adoptive parents do at the time. We went through Catholic Charities, and we had a hard time getting him from the foster mother who was taking care of him before we got him. I remember the day we were being blessed by the priest, and two ladies who had brought him said, when the priest said his name, she goes, well, his name was David. And I said, not anymore. He's my brother, and his name's Barney. That was me. I was very outspoken. I was 6 years old, and, well, almost 8, because there's 8 years difference, but I have always defended him. Yes, sometimes I was jealous of him because all I heard about was his red hair and his blue eyes. But when it came to you talking against him, I took up for him.
Yeah. And I think what you've reminded us is, again, just think of how the world would have not been blessed by, I guess it's Barney. And again, we've said so many times, Gale, that we do talk about abortion and we mention adoption, but here's the other part of that story. And he or she was sticking up for him. Now it sounds like he is helping her. So what a great story. Let's, if we can, take another phone call. We'll go to Willie in Mississippi, WPAE. What would you like to share with us today?
Well, Kerby, this is Willie Kennedy. I'm the station manager here of WPAE and KPAE there, point of view all these years.
Well, thank you.
And wanted to tell you that my wife and I have, back in 1964, adopted our first child. And she had a birth defect on her left hand. Some of the fingers were missing because evidently the mother had probably taken some kind of drugs back in that time that caused that the digits of the finger to be missing.
Yeah, could have been thalidomide or something like that. Go ahead.
Thalidomide.
Yeah.
And we adopted her. She was 6 weeks old, and she has been a precious child in our life. And I tell you what, we never regretted it. She is really, literally our daughter. Of course, we read the story of adoption to them from the very start.
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, we adopted our little boy. He was 9 months old, and he had some problems in his birth. He was probably born prematurely. And we adopted our son, Matthew, who has been in the radio work himself on occasion and with us. We adopted him, and he was 9 months old when we got him, and we went to the home, and this is a brief story, but I was just out in construction work at that time. I was not preaching and not surrendered to preach, and I actually was in between jobs, and we had told the lady that we might not be able to pay the full adoption cost, and when we got to the seller's home in Baton Rouge, I never will forget it. I was prepared to write a check for $400 or $500, whatever it was. And she said, Mr. Kennedy, the board met last night because of some of the problems that Matthew is having and probably will continue to have for a while. We have deferred our adoption fee. We didn't know at the time that we named him Matthew that his name was a gift from God. Later, he was asking the question, Mama, am I adopted? And we told him that story, and that was just a wonderful answer that cleared the clouds.
That's great.
Well, those two children have been a tremendous blessing for us all these years, and we appreciate the Lord allowing us to have an input into their lives.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
We were married 20 years, and then we had one of our own.
Yeah. Great. You're a station manager, so when we come to a mandatory break, and that's coming up. But first of all, your listeners are blessed to have you as that station manager, but I know your children are blessed to have you as a father and mother of them. So, Willie, I appreciate you sharing that with us today, and we always appreciate the partnership with you at WPAE.
All right. Thank you so much, my friend.
We'll take a break, and we'll continue here with Gale Duran right after these important messages.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Time for a few more minutes with Gale Duran. And if you'd like to join us, we're talking about her book, 1 Million Babies, an Adoption Story. And there are some great resources we've placed on our website. If you'd like to join us real quick, we could probably slip in another phone call or two, 1-800-351-1212. But before we go any further, Gale, I wanted to encourage people to visit your website. And as they go to our website, pointofview.net, the first link there is Gale Duran, or they could just type in galeduran.com. But Gale is Gale. So it's a little tougher. So again, we have a link in case they don't know how to spell your name. And when they go there, there's a contact button. And that would be a way in which if people would like to have you come and speak, maybe to a women's group, I think it would be great to do a book signing with this. Maybe there are various pregnancy resource centers around the country that would like to have you tell their story. Maybe adoption agencies that would like to know a little bit more about that. So we've made it pretty easy for people to contact, but you're available for speaking and all sorts of other opportunities, are you not?
Yes, I think women's retreats would be fabulous, but also I can come to churches and other group functions, any venue like that, where I can encourage families, I can encourage women, and I can also encourage crisis pregnancy centers, because I think any woman that reads this story can understand and have her eyes open that there's a purpose and a plan for that baby she's carrying, and that if she just will go ahead and give them up for adoption and make an adoption plan, and surrender that child, the child can have a wonderful life.
I know. A story of Shauna, and then, of course, going into Jeb and what has happened there, and then just a great little adoption guide that's included. So it's kind of a package of a story, which will certainly grab people's heart, but then some great material there for adoption guide. And so let me just, again, mention that that is available. Before I take another phone call, I got to ask at least one or two tough questions. Open adoption, closed adoption. Tough one. I mean, I recognize that everybody has a different view on that, but help us think through that whole issue of an open or closed adoption.
Great question, Kerby. In the 60s, there really was nothing like open and closed adoption.
True, yeah.
And nowadays, the birth mother and the adoptive family have that choice. And so for a lot of families, this is a wonderful option that the child continues to think about, why did my mom place me up for adoption? And in this open adoption, that child can decide if they want to have contact. And I have a great niece in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she says, Aunt Gale, it's wonderful to have two families.
Two families.
So that really works for them. There are other people that if you decide not to, then the closed adoption would be a private situation.
You know, just a while back here, we had Ken Paxton and his wife, Angela. And, of course, Ken Paxton has a great story running for Attorney General in the state of Texas, but Angela has an incredible story about adoption. She was kind of unusual in that she really didn't have that much interest in who her birth mother was, but then later on it kind of developed a little bit, and so she made connection and brought the two mothers together, the birth mother and the adoptive mother, and that is an incredible story which I would encourage people to listen to if they haven't. It's quite a tearjerker, so I won't get into this because I don't want both of us starting to blubber on the air, because it's an incredible story. I mean, it's better than one you could make up in Hollywood. It's just a phenomenal story.
That's right.
But at the same time, I think you have to recognize different kinds of mindsets, different kinds of needs. Sometimes, especially if a child comes from a very abusive background, maybe it's better not to ever have that contact. So again, I'm not going to get in the middle of that. I'll let you make those decisions about that. But we've been primarily focusing pretty much on adoption in America. But just before I take another phone call, we do recognize quite a number of international adoptions as well. I know you're at Denton Bible Church, and I know that there's a support group there. And a fair number of those individuals spend a lot of money that you know in your church, and I know this nationwide, to bring in children from Korea, China, and other places. And that's a whole nother wrinkle to this whole question of adoption, isn't it?
Right. And the foreign adoptions are very popular, and I will add to our radio program today that the listeners need to know that it can be quite expensive.
Yes.
Between $30,000 and $40,000, and that's just an estimate. Your local adoptions, Kerby, I'm glad to say that usually with CPS, if there's any special needs, it's very minimal to adopt, and you have many of the local ones like Gladney Center. You also have Covenant Kids here in Fort Worth.
Yes.
You have so many wonderful adoption agencies that you really do need to just click on their website, contact them, and get in touch with them and see how your home can become a foster home.
And again, one of the things I love about your book is in the back here, you have just page after page on, various domestic adoption standards and all that requires, the application process, the home studies, what it requires if you wanted to actually be a foster care family, then the completion of the family file, the placement of that, the finalizing the adoption, adopting the child, the home study, just all the great resources. So if somebody's saying, I'm interested, but I really don't know what the next step is, this is a great resource. And again, they can contact you at galeduran.com. We have the link at the website. Hit that contact page, and you can find out a little bit more. Let's real quickly go to another phone call, and this time we'll go to the state of Ohio, WGGN. Melissa, thank you for calling today.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to mention a story about my dad being adopted. My grandmother and my grandfather had gone to the orphanage to pick up what they thought was going to be a girl. My grandma wanted a girl. And they brought the children in, and my grandma started looking, and she looked at my grandpa, and there was a young boy there, and she's a baby, and she said, I want that one. And my grandpa said, well, I thought you wanted a girl. And she said, no, I want that one. So that was my dad. Well, then my great-aunt was also going to adopt, and they were getting ready to go, to get the child, and unfortunately, my great-uncle died. And then my cousin, she adopted a child from Russia. So we've had adoptions in the family, but I just want to share that story because, sometimes we really don't know what God's got for us until we get there to see, what he has. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, it's a great story, and there are so many of these stories out there, Gale. Just before we finish off, I guess a lot of people are still saying, okay, are there things that we need to know about helping this adoptive child be integrated into the family? You have some great material in the book about what that might entail, but I think it's probably true to say you just probably take it day by day, don't you?
That's right, and it's an exciting journey. In the book, I'll tell you, Kerby, that I say over and over that it's one of the hardest tasks to be an adoptive family and adopt a child, but it's also going to be one of the most rewarding. And so as people take that adventure on, they're going to have to lean on the Lord and not their own understanding, because it's a very courageous step of faith, and you're going to need to lean on the Lord because there's a lot of things that you're not going to understand. But we all know that God's plan is good for us. A lot of times we don't understand or agree, but it's always a good plan.
I think things have changed, too. I remember there was a time in which there might have been a stigma about being adopted, and I saw that change dramatically years ago through, of all people, Michael Reagan, who was adopted by Ronald Reagan, and he published a book called Twice Adopted. And the idea was I was adopted first by my earthly family, then adopted in my heavenly family because you became a Christian. And today I see more and more of these adoptive children saying, well, my parents, when they had a child, they just had what came out. But my parents, when they adopted me, chose me. And so we've gone from a time in which it was sort of a stigma to almost now a badge of honor, don't you think?
That's right. And we are chosen by God. So come on, we're in this big family. And I think that it is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be able to choose that child.
Well, I kept you a little bit longer than we planned, but just before I let you go, let's again talk about what is available, because first of all, we have your book, and if people want to get a copy, they can get it there. We also have an article about that, but in your web link, we certainly do have a place for people to contact you. And I know that we have so many pregnancy resource centers around the country. We have lots of adoption agencies around the country. And of course, every church should really think about what it might want to do to encourage young people if they are infertile. And about 10% of all couples in a typical church are going to be infertile, so they have to begin to think about their options. This is one to consider. And so you have made yourself available as a person that can come to that church, come to that retreat, come to that particular center, and speak to some of those issues, true?
That's right, and I'd be excited for the invitation. Go to the website, that's GALE, GaleDuran.com, and please fill out the contact form. contact me, and I will make myself available to come. I promise you a wonderful presentation, and also just share my heart about adoption and for the love of unwanted children.
We also have that video that I might mention, and if people want to watch that, the video lasts for a couple of minutes, and it gives you a chance to kind of get a little bit more of your background. Then they can hit that share button, put it on their Facebook page, and maybe educate some others, or maybe send it to somebody that they know are thinking about whether or not they might want to go through the process of adoption. So I thank you for putting together a manual as well as a wonderful story that might encourage others to do that. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend a little bit more time getting into some of the news items today. In the second hour today, we'll also be talking with Matt Philbin of the Media Research Center, talking about how indeed we have been, I think, poorly covering some of the things happening in the Middle East. We'll talk about some of these important news items right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention, in the second hour today, we're going to be talking with Matt Philbin. He is the managing editor of the Media Research Center's Culture and Media Institute. We have noticed for some time, and he has the documentation for that, how the mainstream media just cannot bring themselves to call Hamas a terrorist organization when it's listed by the government as a terrorist organization. And if that's not bad enough, we are also going to be talking about how the big three networks avoid calling ISIS, which is obviously a terrorist organization, even more violent. anything other than rebels or militants. And so we're going to talk a little bit about media bias in the second hour today. And if you'd like to join us, and especially as we talk about the way in which sometimes we have been poorly served by those in the media in terms of covering what has been taking place there in the Middle East, we will be talking with him. And if you certainly appreciated our conversation we had just a few minutes ago with Gale Duran, I certainly would encourage you to go to our website, find out more about the issue of adoption. Just before we take a break, though, I wanted to mention my commentary today. Won't have a lot to say about it, but it has to do with the current campaign of Jesse Jackson. And if you don't receive my daily commentary, it's very easy to do. You can just simply sign up, go to our website, pointofview.net, go to the Get Involved section, click on that, and you can hit check boxes. One of those is my daily commentary. Another one is our show threads, which we sent to you, so you have all the links and information for what we've been talking about on the air. But I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about this commentary because it's one that once you got into the facts and figures, recognize again, I don't think we've been very well served by the media. Because the argument coming from Jesse Jackson right now is that we need to bring the civil rights movement to Silicon Valley. And so he has actually called upon the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate whether these high-tech companies are discriminating. In other words, because they don't have, from his perspective, enough racial diversity, he makes the case that, well, there's no talent shortage, there's an opportunity shortage. And he says that he believes that changing the racial diversity of Silicon Valley is the next step in the civil rights movement. Now, to make his case, he points out that you have almost a little less than 90% of the people who work at Twitter, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and LinkedIn are white or Asian. Now, I think you have to start right off the bat by challenging one of the statements he makes, because after all, I would want to make one very obvious statement that Jesse Jackson seems to be missing, and that is Asians are minorities. And somehow, whenever we have these conversations about racial diversity, people of Asian descent aren't actually counted as a minority. Think about the fact that you have right now men and women of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian descent, and that brings, I think, a lot of racial diversity to the workforce in the first place. Okay, well, let's set that one aside for just a minute. Let's look at something else. Is there a very large pool of individuals that you can draw from? And this is where I think the good work that has been done by Jason Riley, who's been on our program with us. Matter of fact, just recently we talked with him by phone about his latest book, Please Stop Helping Us. He is a writer with a Wall Street Journal. He looked at the graduation rates of those who have a degree in science or engineering. And if you look at our most recent graduates over the last decade or so, about 71% of those with degrees in science and engineering are white, about 14% Asian. Well, if you add those two together, that's pretty close to the percentage that you have right now. It is a truism that a very high percentage of the individuals with science and engineering degrees are either white or Asian. And, of course, that's what Jesse Jackson has been complaining about. Okay, well, you go a little bit further. Only 7% are black. Only 7% are Hispanic. And so that's, when you look at the whole broad science and engineering. However, if you just go back and look at those who have an engineering degree, the reality is, at least the best numbers we can come up with, are of African Americans in 2012, 4% of the graduates with a bachelor's degree in engineering are black. If you look at that, you can recognize that actually they're maybe disproportionately represented right now in what is happening in Silicon Valley. And I think it brings me back to the bigger issue. We can sit here and count by race all that we want, but if you don't have a pool from which to draw, there may be discrimination there. I doubt it, but there may be. But I doubt it because if nothing else, I would think that a lot of these companies right now, because they would value racial diversity, even if personally they didn't, certainly from a corporate, cultural, situation, certainly to get things like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission off their back. They would go out of their way to find individuals that have an engineering degree that are minorities. And the bottom line is, as Jason Riley has pointed out in his piece, quote, Silicon Valley's workforce does not reflect racial animus towards blacks. Rather, it reflects the rates at which whites and Asians are earning the requisite degrees from America's most selective institutions. Forcing Google and Yahoo to lower hiring standards in order to satisfy Mr. Jackson's definition of diversity would only slow innovation and make these companies less competitive. So, in my commentary, I conclude by simply saying, really the best way to really change the racial mix in some of these high-tech companies, I think, would be to, first of all, improve the public schools, and second of all, to really encourage Black and Hispanic students to pursue a degree in engineering, because right now, if there is any degree that is going to guarantee you a fairly good economic ticket and also guarantee the ability to quickly pay off your student loans, it is the enormous benefit that individuals are getting right now, graduating with engineering degrees and then going into these high-tech companies. And that relates very much to the comment we've also made when we had Jason Riley on the program, because in his book, Please Stop Helping Us, he talked about the two issues that he thought were most detrimental to the African-American population. And the very first one that we listed was in his chapter on mandating unemployment. Certainly that was the issue of minimum wage laws. The second one he mentioned, and that one relates very much to this topic, is what he called educational freedom. And in that chapter talks about many of the very terrible schools right now that are found in African-American communities. We can continue throwing money at bad schools, or maybe we can provide alternatives, and things like educational choice, charter schools, private schools, Christian schools, things that are going to much more significantly have a positive impact on that community are the things that we need to do. And of course points out that oftentimes when it comes down to the Black leadership, they oftentimes are much more willing to side with the teachers' unions and oppose things like school choice. So I did want to put that on the table, but if you have not seen my commentary today or would like to receive it on a regular basis, it is available on our website, pointofview.net. And every single day I try to take on a different issue. This one today had to do with tech diversity, but of course we are talking about all sorts of different topics and issues here on Point of View, and do encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more. Another good reason to recommend that you go to our website, which is pointofview.net. In this first hour here, we've talked with Gale Duran, and if you'd like to get a copy of her book, 1 Million Babies, we have a link there so that you can order it. If you would like to know more about her, we have a video that you can watch of her. We also have an article, and most importantly, we were pointing many of you to her website so that you could find out more about the book, also find out much more about having her maybe come and speak to your pregnancy resource center, maybe speak to your adoption agency, maybe just speak to your women's group or church group. And so you have some links that are all available on our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Willie for calling in. I always love to hear from some of our station managers. I want to thank all of you down the line that carry this program. We are grateful for the partnership that we have with you, and encourage you to continue to carry the program, and we want to do all we can to support you as well. All that material is available at our website today, and I hope that you'll click on that button that says Get Involved. If you would like to watch the broadcast in addition to listening to it, we have that available, and that gives you a chance to see many of the guests that we have in studio and to see actually what takes place behind the scenes. And of course, we also have a button there that says Donate. And during these summer months, that's a time when we would certainly encourage you to do what you can to support this ministry. Support your church, support your local radio station, but if you can support us, we would appreciate that as well. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about another clear evidence of media bias, especially when it comes to Hamas and ISIS. All that coming up right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about media bias and how sometimes politically correct style guides keep us from really hearing the truth. If you've listened to Point of View any length of time, you know that often we lament about the fact that we have not been well served by leaders in the media, by leaders in our government to really tell the truth. And you cannot win a war on terrorism if you can't even identify who are terrorists. And so we're going to talk for just a few minutes and certainly welcome your phone calls on this very important issue, because we have articles. We've posted one here: Big Three networks avoid calling ISIS terrorists. They label them as rebels and militants. We have some others, terrorists, not in Gaza. The nets only call them militants. And even the network's silence in many cases, refusing to cover Christian cities in Iraq that have been falling to ISIS. So lots of things to cover today, and we bring to the microphone Matt Philbin, who is the managing editor of the Media Research Center for Culture and Media Institute. He has written quite often various articles and op-eds in the Washington Times, the Daily Caller, One News Now. And Matt, I appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me.
I think everybody has an intuitive notion that when it comes to the coverage of some of these terror organizations, that is the case. Let me take them in order. We'll go with Hamas first. I mean, after all, Hamas has been listed as I think I've said before on this program many times before, as a terrorist organization by our own government. But what have you found in terms of network coverage of Hamas?
Well, that's right. Hamas has been designated a terrorist organization since 1997. Yet, the networks, what we did, we took a look at network coverage of the fighting in Gaza in the months since it started. And of 65 stories that the big three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, did, they only mentioned the word terrorist or called Hamas terrorists 5 times in 65 stories. That's ridiculous. You have this entire episode in Gaza started because Hamas was firing rockets indiscriminately into Israeli population centers. These tunnels that Hamas has dug that have been turning up, they were built specifically with the intent of terrorizing Israeli kibbutzes and agricultural communities. They are as clearly a terrorist organization as any in the world, including Al-Qaeda and including ISIS. And but the big three, they have their narrative, and they're going to stick to it.
Let's see if we can maybe go through that, because you have ABC, CBS, and NBC. It ranged from kind of a 12-1 to 15-1, but basically it wasn't that you found one that was any better. They were all equally guilty of ignoring that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
That's right. The worst was ABC, which was 15-1. They would call them militants or fighters over terrorist. And the best was NBC, which was 12-1. So it really, that's not saying much.
No.
And unfortunately, though, this is what we find repeated again and again when it comes to Islamic terror. that the networks are afraid to call, terrorism what it is on its face. And it's something that the liberal media in general has always had a problem calling it.
If you'd like to join us, I might as well open up the phones because calls are already coming in. 1-800-351-1212. Matt Philbin with us, and we have posted one article on ISIS, but that will then link you all to the others that you can find on Hamas. And again, just to point that out, this is not our designation, but the designated foreign terrorist organizations that have listed everything from Al-Qaeda to Hezbollah as being a terrorist organization also listed Hamas. So when we say this, it's not that we're saying something that the government isn't saying. It's not saying something that isn't kind of obvious to almost any viewer or listener, but it seems to be influenced very dramatically by this narrative. And before we get on to ISIS, Matt, can you speak to that? Because sometimes there are style manuals that say, well, you have to call somebody who's pro-life anti-abortion. You have to call certain things this way. But in these cases, I think the obvious implication is it's just difficult for either a correspondent or then a subsequent editor to use the word terrorism in the same sentence with Hamas.
Well, yeah, that's right. There are style guides, such as the AP style guide. I'm not sure that any of the networks are beholden to any particular style guide.
Right.
But we have had situations after 9/11, if I recall right. Reuters came out and said that it didn't want to call anyone a terrorist because, that old cliche that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Well, that's Reuters. You expect that, yeah.
Right, Al Reuters. But unfortunately, there is a moral equivalence about this. And they don't want to call them terrorists because they don't want to give their opponents, in this case Israel, any more weight than Hamas has, sadly.
Yeah.
They're legitimizing Hamas by not calling them what they are.
And again, I think even some people could say, well, okay, that's one thing, but let me take the next one because that's one really got my attention, and that is ISIS. I mean, you cannot go on Facebook right now, if you've got any Facebook friends, and not, it's almost impossible to avoid now the pictures that people are posting about beheading of children and shooting people and killing women and robbing. And I mean, this is just probably the most extreme terrorist organization we have ever seen. There are stories that have said that ISIS was seen as more extreme than Al-Qaeda. And yet again, the big three networks just seem to avoid calling ISIS terrorists, right?
Yes, they call them militants. And it's hard to believe because if anybody is a terrorist, it is ISIS. The images coming out of the Middle East and the numbers, the sheer numbers of atrocities going on are mind-boggling. And it's very difficult for anybody with any sense of reality to understand why you would call these people anything other than what they are, because you're aiding and abetting them. Yeah. This is pure terror. These people are killing people by the thousands simply for not being Muslim. This is bad stuff. It's medieval, essentially, and the networks, for some reason, just do not want to look it in the face.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take some phone calls, and we've only touched on two of these issues. There's a few more, but if you have some comments about media bias, the inability of our political leaders, the inability of people in the media to call a group like ISIS terrorists, we would certainly welcome your phone calls. We'll also talk about the inability of the media to talk about persecution of Christians. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Jesse Jackson is at it again. This time his target is Silicon Valley. He has called upon the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate why these high-tech companies don't have more racial diversity. He argues there's no talent shortage, there's an opportunity shortage. The latest figures show that nearly 90% of the people who work at Twitter, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and LinkedIn are white or Asian. Changing the racial diversity of Silicon Valley is what Jesse Jackson says is the next step in the civil rights movement. Let me begin by stating something missing in his analysis. Asians are minorities. Somehow, whenever we talk about racial diversity, people of Asian descent aren't counted as a minority. Men and women of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Indian descent bring lots of racial diversity to the workforce. Now let's look at graduation rates. Jason Riley, writing in the Wall Street Journal, discovered that 71% of science and engineering students are white, 14% Asian, while only 7% are black and 7% are Hispanic. If you add the white and Asian graduates percentages together, you get 85%. That is approximately what you find in Silicon Valley. If you focus just on engineering degrees, you find the percentages are even lower. In 2012, blacks earned only 4% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in the discipline. Jason Riley observes Silicon Valley's workforce does not reflect racial animus towards blacks. Rather, it reflects the rates at which whites and Asians are earning the requisite degrees from America's most selective institutions. Forcing Google and Yahoo to lower hiring standards in order to satisfy Mr. Jackson's definition of diversity would only slow innovation and make these companies less competitive. The best way to change the racial mix in these high-tech companies would be to improve the public schools where black and Hispanic students study and to encourage many of them to pursue a degree in engineering. That would be more effective than the Jesse Jackson Silicon Valley shakedown. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Matt Philbin with us. He is with the Media Research Center. We have a link to Media Research Center, and in particular, the managing editor of their Culture and Media Institute. Let's take some phone calls. We'll go first to Dwayne. Dwayne, thank you for joining our conversation today. You're on with Matt Philbin.
Yes, Kurt, I want to let you know that I'm just as disgusted as you and Matt about the media failure to let us know about the crisis going on in Iraq and elsewhere that involves Christians being murdered. And I'm just particularly with this media and how it is helping our president, helping him by lying for him about these incidents he's been involved in, about or simply misreporting, not telling people the truth about all these scandals and incidents our president involved. And I wanted to know, can anything be done to prosecute the executives of ABC, NBC, CBS, and all these other news organizations that fail to let us know about all these incidents?
Sure. I don't think we want to do anything to endanger the First Amendment, but we simply can ignore news outlets that aren't telling the truth, can't we, Matt?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's these days it's incumbent on the citizen to go to the best source of news. There are many sources out there, more than ever before, and thankfully, the big three networks and CNN no longer have a lock on what we watch and in a sense, what we learn. So take advantage of the diversity of media that's out there and the amount of outlets there are. And it's, as I said, it's incumbent on the citizen to educate himself.
I would think so. He mentioned something that's another one of your articles here, and that is networks refuse to cover Christian cities in Iraq falling to ISIS, and that has been an undercovered story. Let's give partial credit, because in that story, Curtis also mentions that at least Cuomo and CNN did say that the story was largely underreported. But if it really weren't for some of the Christian media outlets, I think people would know a lot less about the plight of persecuted Christians around the world. Your thoughts?
That's absolutely correct. The Christian media, Catholic media, they are doing the lion's share of reporting on these stories. And the sad thing is, it's reached crisis stage with ISIS in Iraq, but sadly, it's not new. This has been going on for several years, and the number of Christians in the Middle East is down to a historic low. They have been ethnically cleansed from areas of Egypt, from areas of Syria, and now in Iraq especially. And in the most absolute brutal ways, beheading of Christian children, churches burning. It's a crime, and it is especially a crime because some of the oldest Christian communities in the world are being destroyed, systematically destroyed, on purpose by ISIS.
Wow. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Georgia WLPE. Kurt, thank you for calling today.
Hey, Kerby. Yeah, this comment where they're talking about the media and their bias and their blindness to this whole thing made me think of a comical thing that happened to me a few years ago when I was jogging on a track, and a little boy, about a 6-year-old, he saw me coming, and he turned and he's looking at me, then he covered his eyes up, and he's like, he made me disappear. Media's doing that. They're like, if they not look at the situation that's going on, well, maybe it'll go away. Maybe these guys will disappear. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, and that's kind of the mindset right now. That is, if we don't report on it, maybe it really didn't happen. The bottom line is that we have, because of talk radio and because of alternative media, even in television and cable, we have alternative sources of news. And so, whereas before, as you were really alluding to, Matt, the big three really did kind of dominate the national conscience. I think a lot of people know exactly what's happening in the Middle East. They're just appalled that the media are sort of like that little boy covering his eyes saying, well, I just won't look at it, and thus it really is just going to simply disappear.
Well, that's true. And there's also another side to this, and that is what the media believes, what the left believes. And they don't want to report anything that is contrary to, their understanding of the world. And according to their understanding, Muslims are always the oppressed. Christians are always the oppressors. Western Europeans, anyone from the West is automatically going to be the oppressor. And so there is an aspect of freedom fighting to whatever it is, whatever group it is that is committing the latest atrocity. You see that with Hamas all the time. That the moral equivalence is because they refuse to believe that Hamas could be the oppressor, that ISIS could be the oppressor. It just does not fit into that sort of academic lefty worldview.
Yeah, it changes the narrative, and of course, we understand the depth of evil, and it's a sad commentary what's unfolding right now. Let's go to South Carolina. Jim, you're on with Matt Philbin.
Hey, Matt. Hey, thanks for taking my call. Very interesting discussion, and I'm glad that the topic is being brought forward. I'm not left and I'm not right. I'm kind of an independent person who's had the opportunity to travel the world, and I would say that in the current situation, there are long attempts to bring some peace to that region with questionable outcomes. It probably would be very wise for us to sit on the sidelines. My argument is this is a religious battle, and if we think about separation of church and state, I really think that this is a point where we need to sit back and let some things evolve, even though they're horrible. That's not the mission of our government, and that's not the mission of our people right now. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Sure, and we can have a conversation about foreign policy. As a matter of fact, in this last half hour, I'll be glad to open up the phones because, after all, the president has talked about what he believes we can and should do in Iraq and in light of what is happening with ISIS. But certainly we do owe it to ourselves to be better educated. And I feel like, Matt, as kind of our final takeaway point here, the mainstream media on many issues simply does not educate us. One, because of, like you said, there's sort of a narrative and a worldview issue. And two, because they're on to the next issue. They sometimes even give you the historical context of what is taking place. And that's why I think it is so important that the good work that you do there at the Media Research Center helps us really document what I think intuitively we know, and that is we're not being well served by the mainstream media. And that's why it's important to look for alternative sources of news.
That's right. We are absolutely being ill-served, and educating yourself is the only thing you can really do.
You are the media watchdog for America, and in particular, I want to encourage people to click on the button that we have here to Media Research Center. But for just a minute, I thought I'd also have you talk about that section of the Media Research Center called the Culture and Media Institute, because we have spent our time over the years talking with various individuals that have been in that position. Talk about how listeners might be able to benefit from some of the things that you do there at the Culture and Media Institute, which is part of the Media Research Center.
Well, the Culture and Media Institute is, as it sounds, concerned with our culture, with society, with presentation in the media of issues that have to do with morality, that have to do with faith, patriotism, life, sexuality, basically the sort of meat and potatoes social conservative issues. And basically we deal with watching the news. We also watch entertainment. We watch celebrity, media for that kind of what's going on, to try and get a sense of what's going on in the world and how we can do our best to preserve the sort of Judeo-Christian culture that we have inherited and we are busy squandering.
Well, again, you've done a great job of that. People can go to the Media Research Center. We have a link there, and they can certainly click on that section on the Culture and Media Institute in particular. And I appreciate the fact that you're looking at that oftentimes with a Christian set of eyes and recognize how important it is to cover those issues as well. We give high praise to the Media Research Center. We certainly give high praise to some of the members of Congress, although they're very few in number, that have spoken out about the persecution of Christians, and we certainly wish that their numbers would increase. So thank you very much, Matt, for being with us today here on Point of View.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
We will take a break, and in this last half hour, we're going to give you a chance to join the conversation on some of the issues that we have raised. I also want to bring some more to the table. A very good piece that came out by David Kupelian in The Whistleblower called Chaos Theory. You know, we've talked about the Cloward-Piven idea. He goes into that in a lot more detail and helps us understand what is happening at our border right now, and maybe even in our foreign policy goes back to that, and then brings quite a bit as well from Saul Alinsky. So last half hour, if you'd like to join us on some of these conversations, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to some of our phone calls today. Don in California, listening on KYCC. Don, thank you for joining the conversation today.
Hi, Kerby. Good to listen to your program today. You know, I didn't know you guys took calls from Mars, that last caller.
Well, I wasn't going to get into foreign policy, but let's get into it. You know, I was just really talking more about media bias, but he says, well, we shouldn't go in getting involved. And I'm like, well, we have and probably will in the future, but go for it.
Yeah, he was from another planet. But, you know, I think the thing that you guys touched on earlier that I think is important to really emphasize is this is what liberalism looks like. What's going on in the media and the world, for them not to mention every time that Hamas is a terrorist organization, fits into their worldview that everything's kind of relative, everything's kind of let's tolerate each other's beliefs. So all of those functioning belief systems that the liberal worldview is, this is how it works in the real world. They can't bring themselves to condemn some organization because that's not what liberalism's 10 Commandments are. So I really, when I talk to people a lot of times who challenge me when I engage other people on the college campuses and what have you, is I say, well, now, listen, I hear what you just said, but how does that work in the real world?
Right, yeah.
I know you have this ideal, but let's put that into practice. Like they'll say, well, I believe everybody should be able to choose to do whatever they want with their bodies. And I say, well, you know, that sounds good, but let's see how that works in the real world. And then I start giving them real world situations and they start backtracking. So I think for the media, we need to kind of hold these guys accountable and write to these guys. I've written to some of these people on our local stations and said, so why didn't you say it this way? Because this is what actually happened. And they kind of hem-haw around and I say, see, your form of a worldview doesn't work in the real world. It produces chaos and confusion. So I think that's what this is all about. I think the liberal media, they're showing us what it would look like if all of us thought the way they thought, or like that last caller. Well, you know, let the people kill each other. We just got to let this play itself out. And they have to think that way if they want to be true to their liberal philosophy of life.
Well, you know, you were talking about wanting to write to the members of the media. We actually, just about an hour before airtime, toyed with the idea of even having an action alert so that individuals might want to contact at least the three major networks. We still may do that. We have some other things coming down the line this week on action alerts, but that's a good point. But back to your key point, and that is showing people the logical consequences of their ideas. Francis Schaeffer, in his book, The God Who Was There, used to call it taking the roof off. And what he meant is that sometimes people hold to these views very steadfastly until they realize the consequences. Just like you could take the roof off of a house, let the rain fall in, they go, well, I guess I need a roof. Same kind of idea that here sometimes individuals have to see the logical consequences of their worldview. And I'll be blunt enough to say that right now we're seeing the consequences of this president's foreign policy or lack thereof. I mean, this was a president, remember, back in 2004 when he gave that famous speech before the Democratic Convention, was criticizing the war in Iraq, even as he ran as sort of the anti-war candidate in 2008 against Hillary Clinton, who had voted for military action. This is the consequences of pulling your troops out. And what we are seeing now, this horrific amount of terrorist action by ISIS, and then the inability of the mainstream media to even use the T word, terrorism, I think illustrates, Don, your point only so well. So I appreciate you calling in today.
Hey, thanks, Kerby. I appreciate all you do to help keep us informed and give us the right tools to get out there and engage the culture.
By the way, I might just mention that tomorrow we have Jim Sire on in the first hour, and of all the people I've ever quoted from in terms of worldview issues, he is probably at the top of the list. Last week when I was speaking at Tony Evans Church at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, I recommended his book, The Universe Next Door. And so speaking of providing you with very good tools, we're going to be talking about his latest book, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But Jim Sire has one called Apologetics Beyond Reason, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about how to equip you to have more tools in your apologetic toolbox, more tools in your evangelistic toolbox, more tools really in just your discussion and debate with others. So I certainly want to encourage you to listen tomorrow. He'll be on the first hour, and we'll get into some other news items. Let's go back to the phones, though. Eric in Ohio has been waiting, and I think he wanted to speak to this issue as well. So you have the floor.
Hello.
Yes.
How's it going, sir?
What would you like to share with us today?
Well, I'm listening to everything that's going on, and basically what I kind of told the young lady is, been over the sandbox in the past, been there, done that, and I'm seeing what the topic is, and unfortunately, what people are missing out in the U.S. is, one, the lack of Christ. Big issue.
Uh-huh.
You know, because they haven't been there, done that.
And by being in the sandbox, I assume that means you served in the military. And if that's the case, thank you for your service. But what would you say to those of us that have not been over in the Middle East? What have you discovered?
Is anywhere in this world is you're going to have countries that do genocide because they decide to. And we've seen it in different countries, Somalia, you know, you name it, South America. The biggest thing is people have to understand, and I learned this a long time ago, and it was from a Russian who actually his dad died in Siberia, but when he got his citizenship in the USA, he just said how much he loved America, the USA.
Wow.
And the reason being is we're such a young country. We're only 225 years old now, you know, something like that. And when you look at all these other countries, what we classify as third world countries, they're not third world countries. They've been around 10,000 years before we were. And what they do is what they do, and it's going to happen every year or every 5 years or every 10 years. And it's a time and place where the USA, similar if we were as smart as Canada, would just say, it's not our business to put our nose over there, jeopardize young men, to see young men have limbs lost.
Sure. I guess you're finished there. Well, I think the point is there are times when we need to be strategically involved, but I think we have to make those decisions carefully. But the point is that at least the one we were making just a minute ago is we were in Iraq. Agree with it or not. And of course, anybody that's been around me knows that I have had some reservations about whether we should be projecting force into these various countries. But we're seeing the consequences of our lack of presence there now. And that is, number one, illustrated by the terrific and horrific is probably a better word, evidence of these terrorist organizations, in particular ISIS. One of the articles I've posted on the website here is now you have Islamists from around the world coming to support ISIS. You have members of Al-Qaeda in this article that talks about leaving Yemen and Africa to join in large numbers with this terrorist group. And so in some respects, we almost seem to have gone from bad to worse. Christians are being driven out of areas in Iraq, where they existed under Saddam Hussein, maybe even existed under the leadership, but now because there is no countervailing force, you are seeing a complete purge of Christians from that region. We are seeing all of the horrific things that are taking place, and so there are consequences to a botched foreign policy. There are consequences to a president saying it's time to get out. There are consequences to a president saying we shouldn't have gone into Iraq in the first place, and I'm going to leave it as quickly as I can. And this is, of course, I think exactly what we are finding right now as we are watching the news when they do cover it, or when we see it on our Facebook pages or in our alternative media, and it is a sad commentary indeed. But let's take a break. I know some more of you would like to join the conversation today, and I'd love to give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Was going to share some things on chaos theory. We'll just postpone that to later in the week because I see we have a number of phone calls, and we'd love to hear your comments. So let's give you that opportunity. And if you'd like to know a little bit more, including this article I just mentioned about how now Muslim extremists from around the world are joining with ISIS into Iraq, that's on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, then we'll come back and take some more phone calls. That coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Have almost a full bank of phone calls. We'll do our best to try to go through as many as we possibly can. And so let's immediately head out to Arizona. Ron, what would you like to share with us today?
First, I'd like to share with you the name Jesus Christ and lift that up in the glory of the Most High God. Speaking on behalf of I Am to all Christian believers out there that are listening to this conflict is against Christians. It's against our Most High Father, the I Am. Muslims believe Allah will give the land to them. They will not accept a state that has a Jew alive in it.
True.
1948, they've had that opportunity. Now, what we need to do as Christians is prepare ourselves to meet the Lord. Are you, as a Christian brother, ready to stand for your faith and be executed in the name of Jesus Christ by those who believe in Allah? Victory, as Jesus showed us, is not in taking up arms. It's in taking up love. So, I offer you an opportunity to get in touch with Hal Lindsey on his radio station and on his website. He will keep you believers in touch with what's going on. There's also another website called dailyalert.org. These are Jewish believers who are going through every piece of media they can in North America and Asia and providing it for the Jewish leaders of America. I invite you to look at this for your information, along with the mfa.il.gov. That's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Israel in the government section. And that's it. God bless.
Okay. We did mention that Daily Alert the other day when we had one of our guests in studio. And, of course, we've had Hal Lindsey on. It's been a while, and we're going to get him on again. That would be a great opportunity to hear from him, Joel Rosenberg, and many others that are over there in Israel. Let's head on to Roy in Georgia. Roy, thank you for joining us. What would you like to share with us today?
Well, I just would like to share the overall view of what we're in the middle of. It started a long time ago with our national policy where we became the keepers of the peace in the world.
Yeah.
And like Israel, formed alliances with people we didn't have anything in common with as far as faith or absolute morals. We're the ones that rescued Stalin in Russia in World War II. What would have happened had we said we're not going to have an alliance with him because of his character and his stance?
Sure.
I don't know. But since then, we have formed alliances because of economics, of worry about resources of oil. And now that we've got in the middle, it's just like unscrambling an egg. We have got in the middle of supplying people with weapons that years later will be used against us, of giving support to people who we have nothing in common with. And it's just a real mess. And I think we have a president who has decided, consciously or unconsciously, to destroy America. He's doing as best he can. And I think God has sent us what we asked for. We asked for somebody who didn't depend upon their morals or their ethics or their views. It had to do with what was good for our pockets.
You know, George Washington, our first president and father of our country, warned us about and really told us to avoid entangling alliances. And it was true in the 18th century. I think it's even truer in the 21st century. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And anybody who's a Christian, you can't read the Old Testament and see that Israel got in trouble because they went alliances. And all that to say is that on top of that, now that we're in this scrambled egg, I mean, we already have the omelet. We got to live with it. It's hard to take a situation like this and say the people that are being persecuted overseas are Christians, and how can we stand by and do nothing? Well, nations are called to fight nations, not individuals against individuals. But we have a president who is as anti-Christian as you could ever ask for. How could we ask him to protect Christians in Iraq?
Well, and that was the question we raised on our Friday program here, going in and dropping a couple of bombs to try to protect this particular group that are Zoroastrians, and I think we should support anyone that is being persecuted and certainly being affected by terrorist organizations, but it was at least a little bit curious to those of us around the table that the president did not feel that there was any reason to get involved when we had Christians that were being driven out of Mosul and that individuals were being raped, killed. They were stealing the rings off the women and many times just cutting their fingers off. It's just a faster way to get it. And, of course, now we've seen ISIS beheading children and all the rest. Then we finally get involved. But then again, the president's very clear that this is a limited military engagement. I think we've heard that before as well. And as you said, Roy, it's real hard to unscramble an egg, and that is exactly what's taking place there. Let's go back to the phones. I'll try to get in as many calls as we can, but if we run out of time today, obviously there will be opportunities tomorrow. Diane in South Carolina, what are your thoughts?
Oh, hello, Kerby. I love your show, and I love everything you do for the Christians in America. My thoughts are, I watch the news, CNN, every day. I'm a homemaker. And the stuff with Israel, I think we should stand behind Israel 100%. That's God's chosen people. And Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Yes.
And Iraq, the same thing. ISIS, I mean, they threatened to put their flag on our White House. I mean, they are terrorists.
That's their goal.
And, yeah, it's so heartbreaking to see those people on the mountain and, they're being slaughtered just because they're Christians. It's not right. And, that's my thoughts.
Well, no, those are really good thoughts. And let me give high praise while we're, obviously being somewhat negative, and rightly so. Let's give high praise to Representative Frank Wolf, one of the few outstanding spokespeople to the issue of Christians who are being persecuted. A person has been speaking to this issue for many years. As a matter of fact, today I think my friend Derek McTaxis in the Breakpoint commentary gives him some kudos, and I certainly don't want to go any further without mentioning the fact that there are some members of Congress that have been speaking to those issues, and I really do appreciate his stand over the years. And let's go back to the phones real quickly and see if we can talk to Earl. What would you like to share with us today?
Well, I'm more concerned about the Christian liberty here in America. See, as it stands right now, we are more in a scrambled egg situation than any other country. Well, what is right is being presented as wrong.
Yes.
And our president that we have put in there, he never confessed really to be a Christian except to get elected. But everything he has done has been for the Muslim country. Our people are being killed with American weapons. Now, this ought not to be so. Where are these weapons from America coming into those countries to kill those people? And the word said that. The word said that we as Christians going to suffer persecution and die for the name of Christ. And I read where Napoleon had wrote, the best way to defeat a country, a strong country, is work from within that country out. And this is what's happening to our country now. We got people in leadership that's working outwardly to destroy the moral values of America.
Well said. I was going to quote today, and we'll get to this maybe next few days, some of this material from Cloward Piven and Saul Alinsky. Matter of fact, this current president said that he probably learned more from Saul Alinsky than he learned at Harvard Law School. By the way, I might say I agree with that, but nevertheless, we're going to go and cover some of that later in the week, and that will make your case as well, Earl. And not only was that an argument that Napoleon made, it was also an argument made by the communists that the best way to bring down the United States and the best way to bring down countries is to actually foment dissension within. And that has been known from the very beginning. You look at some of the historians that have looked about the fall of these great nations, whether it was the fall of the Roman Empire, the Greek nation, certainly Egypt, the Etruscans, the Carthaginians, and really even the nation of Israel. And you see that oftentimes the nation fell from within. When the barbarians were at the gate, it's simply because they never had a will to actually defend themselves. So that is something to pay attention to. And Earl, I appreciate your reminder, but we are simply out of time. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about some of the conversation that we've had today, the issues related to everything from adoption to the issue of the way in which the media has poorly covered these terrorist organizations, those articles are available. The web links are there, and the videos and books are there as well. Visit our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.